Hi, everybody, and thank you very much for coming to my talk, Questioning Your Values, Rethinking What Drives Your Design. So I'm sure we've all heard the term value-driven design, but have you ever stopped to question whose values are they? And if someone asked you, would you be able to articulate what your values are and how you've embedded them in your design practice? So this talk is, first off, going to start looking at, what are values and where do they come from? Then we're going to look at how you can implement them in your design practice in the wider context of industry, and then get you to understand the power that we have as designers and creatives in really creating change and driving better outcomes. So now to give you all a bit of context about who I am. So hi, I'm Lesley-Ann Daly, and yes, I'm design research consultant at Globant, which is a global tech and innovation company. Now, my role is very much in the early stages of design. So this is talking to clients and helping them navigate and define what they are designing and why. It's also talking to the real people who are going to be using the technologies, and then also looking at current trends and future trends in the industry. Then taking all of this, synthesizing it into insights so it can inform what we design. So it's very much about creating this good, solid foundation then to create better outcomes, and outcomes that are good for both the business and for the people using the technology. Now, alongside that, I'm also just finishing up a PhD, which looks at the ethical design of sensory augmentation technologies. So these are kind of futuristic technologies where you can enhance the current senses that you have, or also give you new senses, and it's a type of human enhancement technology. So similar to my work, I do a lot of participatory design, so this is talking to experts and publics, and I also use something called speculative critical design to envision the futures of this technology. So we want to look at if we design it ethically or not, how that's going to look in the future, and look at the impacts that it has on people and societies, so that then we can inform how we design today. So this talk is very much a combination of the insights that I have both from working in industry and doing that research in academia. But I never meant to end up here. So 8 years doing a PhD, but when I started, I never really knew what ethics was, and it definitely wasn't something I wanted to get into. So for me, when I heard the term ethics, I thought about really complex legal documents or really impenetrable philosophical texts that it seemed like the more you read into them, the more complex that it got. So ethics, I just felt was for someone who was more intelligent than me. But actually, the more I looked at it, the less complex it got, because I realized that there's no one right answer. So therefore, it is something that anyone can practice. So because our teams and our technologies are all unique, there can never be one right answer for every situation. So I wasn't going to have the real academics calling me out because I didn't know the answer, or calling me a fraud because I was just trying to use the word ethics to give my designs a bit more gravitas. So this talk is really looking at opening up ethics as a practice that everybody can do. So ethics, again, it's something that is quite abstract and that I didn't understand before. But if we look at the design process, we can see ethics in everything that we do. So first off, looking at what kind of information we're researching and where it comes from. So are the books that you're reading and the text that you're looking at maybe all from Western perspectives? Or maybe the scientific papers that you're reading, are all of their studies just tested on white men? So it's really looking at, who are we getting our perspectives from, and are we using the perspectives of just a few to inform how we design for the many? Next, we can also see the ethics in what information we're training our systems on. So I'm sure most people here have heard of, bad data in, bad data out. So this links back to the first example. Is the information that we're feeding our technologies already biased? And we've seen the horrendous consequences of this already, with a lot of communities getting discriminated against, and the technologies perpetuating the human bias. Next, we can see ethics in kind of physical technologies and wearables, and how we're designing them and who we're including in the process. So this glove, or this image of this glove, is supposed to represent a haptic glove, which is a type of technology that uses sensors to read what your hand does during sign language. And the idea is that they can then take those movements and translate it into text or speech for people who aren't deaf or who don't understand sign language. Now, many of these gloves have been made, and many of them have failed. And the main critique is that it's because they were made for and by people without hearing impairments. So if they had actually included people in the design process from the deaf community, they would have understood that there is so much more to sign language than just the hand movement. It's also your facial expression and your bodily gestures, and these give a lot of context to what is being said. And then lastly, we can also see ethics in the materials that we use for technologies. So are the materials that we're using sustainable? Can they be repaired? Can they be recycled? Or what happens to them at the end of their useful life? Are the technologies that we're creating just ending up on a scrap heap of obsolescent technologies? So ethics is also in thinking not just about the people that we affect, but the world that we affect through our designs as well. So, what are values? So values are our core beliefs, and they guide how we behave and act. Now, they are things that we care about, and we can see them in all different places. So, for example, we've got our personal values. So these might be things like honesty, compassion, patience, generosity, and kindness. We've got interpersonal values, so things like loyalty and forgiveness and truth. You may have some values based around, your work or your studies and around achievement. So things like dedication, creativity, and as we heard about before, accountability. Now, there's also philosophical and spiritual values, so things like mindfulness, harmony, wisdom. And then lastly, there's also societal and global values. So things like justice, equality, sustainability, diversity, and inclusivity. Now, these are just an example. There are many more values, but this is just to give you an idea. And you can, so far I've been using two different terms. I've been using both the term value and the term ethics. And there is a distinct difference. So values become ethics when we apply them to real-world situations. So a value is something that you believe in, and the ethics are the rules and the guidelines that you use to actually put it into practice. So let's take inclusivity for an example. We hear this word all of the time now. People saying that they value inclusivity, they want their products to be inclusive. But what does that actually mean, and how do we implement that into our practice? So first off, it's asking ourselves, are we designing our physical technologies for people with diverse bodies? So this is not just necessarily different size bodies, but also bodies with different abilities. Secondly, we can look at, are we including people with different experiences in the design and testing? So people from different economic backgrounds, from different places in the world, who have different levels of familiarity with the thing that you are designing. Next, are we providing accessible, jargon-free information? So the information that you're providing about your technology and how to use it, are you using language that is understandable by different levels of literacy and, for example, can be read by something like a screen reader? Also, is there any technical or complex terminology, and are you explaining this in plain language? So this is particularly important when we're looking at things like medical technologies or human enhancement technologies, where there's real impacts that can happen to your body and mind. So people need to understand the benefits and the risks of what they are agreeing to before they give informed consent. And lastly, you can also ask yourself, is this design actively excluding anybody? Now, this is not necessarily something that we do consciously, but it's very easy to fall into designing for the default user, so the person that it's always been designed for, which historically has been the generic white male. So are you asking yourself, why is it only being designed for these people? Can it benefit other people? Are there any particular technical limitations that are stopping it, or are you just not considering everybody else? And when we look at applying values as well, it's not just in our work lives. It's also in how we treat other people and care for other things. So this might be our friends and family, it might be animals, strangers, or the planet, because how we behave is a direct reflection on what we care about and what we value. So now we know what values are, where do they come from? So from the second that we're born, there's many different influences trying to instill values in us. So this can be from your family and your culture. It might be the type of privileges you did or didn't grow up with. Maybe you grew up within a particular religion, and they come with their own set of values, maybe around, faith or gender norms. Also, our cultures and our society have embedded values. So if we think of the Western culture, we tend to value individualism, where many other cultures around the world value higher collectivism, so thinking about the group before the individual. And there's a lot of narratives that we have in our world as well that makes up what we value. So think about when we're young and we're reading fairy tales and fables. You've got, the witches, the goblins, the knights in shining armor. We've also got our advertisements, so either what we're consuming or is being targeted towards us, and they are telling us different things, as well as the media we're consuming, like the films that we're watching. So all of these different narratives are trying to show us and inform us how we should or we shouldn't live. But how many of the values that you have today are ones that you've actually chosen, and how many of them are ones that you've inherited? Now, it's not necessarily a bad thing, inheriting values. Obviously, our families, our schools, our communities want to instill us with the values that they think are important so that we grow up to be good people. However, as we go through life, we meet new people, we have new experiences, we go new places. And when we do that, we're exposed to new values and new ways of being. So you can either see these new ways and think, that's got nothing to do with me, that doesn't align with what I believe in. Or you can critically think about them and reflect on, actually, do the values I grew up with or the ones that I've just engaged with align more with who I am today? And then you can make that choice about what ones you want to use going forward. Now, I can give a little example about my own life and when I had to choose what values I believed in. So I grew up in a family that just did not care about politics. It was never discussed, it was never debated, it just wasn't on the radar. So if anything, I inherited a lack of care about politics and what that could mean and the actions that could come out of that. And I didn't care, because I didn't know to care. And it wasn't until I lived with some very strong and politically engaged women who introduced me to the world of politics that it then became part of my life. And I'm a lefty, surprise, surprise. And then when something like the absolute train wreck that was Brexit and Trump happened, I also realized the importance of not just having values, but putting them into action. So in this context, it's about voting, and voting for people who align with your values and then can enact those actions to bring them into the world. So I chose not to stay with what I inherited, but inform myself so going forward I could bring those values into my life. So next is 2 examples of how narratives in things like marketing, advertising, and media can influence what we believe. So this first one is around advertising, and this lovely woman who is almost having too much fun with her shampoo. And I won't mention the brand name, but I'm sure you've all seen these kind of adverts before. It's for a shampoo that is advertising that it has natural ingredients. And now, over the past few decades, we've had a lot of these products who are advertising as being natural or have natural ingredients, and they're set up in a way that makes you believe that they are somehow better or morally superior to anything that is man-made, unnatural, or synthetic. Now, 1, how much of these are actually natural and how much of it is greenwashing? And that's a whole other rant I could get into, but I'm not going to today. And number 2, what does natural actually mean? Like, why is calling something natural makes it inherently better than something that has been made by humans? Now, I'm not saying that anything that is actually natural is bad, but I am saying that things that are made by humans are also great. So if you think about it, our clothes aren't natural. Medicines and hospitals, they're not natural. Conferences are definitely not natural, but that doesn't make them any worse. And this is something that I see also in my research around human enhancement technology and people having an aversion to anything that is seen as unnatural. So when talking to publics, they often reject the technology because they think we're interfering in the natural body and we're no longer pure human if we have man-made technologies in us. And now, I believe that human enhancement is just one of our newest ways that humans have found to try and enhance our lives and our surroundings and push what's impossible, which is something that we've been doing since the dawn of time. So there's, in my mind, no way that just having man-made things within your body makes you any less human or unnatural in any way. The next example is dystopian science fiction. So this genre has had a massive impact in how we think about particularly futuristic technologies. So anyone who hasn't seen this film, it's called Gattaca, and it shows a world where people are able to genetically engineer their children so that they've got optimized looks, fitness, health, intelligence, which in theory, why would that be a bad thing? Of course, every parent wants their child to have the best setup in life possible. However, it also shows the negative consequences of the technology and its impact on society, and particularly how it's created this strata of like the haves and the have-nots. So the superior people who are getting all of the advantages, and then the people who are unenhanced who don't. And it very much leans into fears around things like eugenics and inequalities that are made through privilege and wealth. Sci-fi like this can be really polarizing. So you'll get some people who look at this and just see it as a warning, reject the technology outright. I don't want that, it doesn't align with my values. Then you get people who see this and also see it as a warning, but not about the technology, but about how it's being used. And then they can think of it as an inspiration to say, okay, but what about if we made this technology more ethically? So how could we still keep the amazing opportunities that the technology brings, but in a way that is beneficial for more people? So the common theme going through this is very much about not just taking the information that is served to you at face value. So whether that comes from your family, from adverts, from movies, really critically thinking about what it actually means and what it means to you. So I want you to take a minute and think about what drives you. So what are the things that you care about, or what do you think you care about? Having watched this, is there anything that you now think about of your values and traditions growing up that maybe don't align with who you are today? Or have you been misled by different bits of media? And are they the values that you want to bring going forward? So if we go back to the initial question of value-driven design and whose values are you designing by, think about that. Are you designing with your own values, your families, your companies, some rich white guy who's got more money than sense? Like, if we end up just designing by default, we end up designing similar things with similar outcomes. So, thinking about all this now, one of the crucial things is to think critically about what you value, which may seem like a lot of extra hard work. So on top of your job, like doing the designing and the thinking, I'm also asking you to reevaluate where you stand in the world and learn about ethical requirements. However, ethics doesn't have to be boring. Actually, when we think outside the box and have to think differently, that is where true innovation comes from. It's when we get to start to play and experiment and ask questions and design something that's truly unique. And there's no better place we can see this than in assistive technologies, where the default or the normative technologies do not work. So I'll quickly run through some of these examples. We've got the typewriter, which was designed for people who are blind because they can't write out by hand to communicate with people. The electric toothbrush was designed for people with limited mobility and muscle strength. And voice recognition technologies were designed for people who can't physically interact with computers, so instead they were able to use their voice to engage with them. And if we look forward into the future as well, we've got some already innovative medical technologies like brain-computer interfaces, and then people thinking about them differently and how they can be used for enhancement possibilities. So there's absolutely nowhere that says that designing ethically needs to be boring. And I've mentioned throughout the talk the idea that we also need to think about the planet. So designing, not just thinking about the impact for people, but also for the planet in general and animals. So looking at this image, it might seem quite like sci-fi and far-fetched, but then think back to a few years ago, and the idea of designing with smart systems and AI agents also seemed like sci-fi, and now it has so quickly become normalized. So what if designing for the planet also becomes normalized? Now, I follow a philosophical theory called posthumanism, and it's very much about challenging how we look at the world and our human-centric view of the world, and asking why humans are put on the top of a hierarchy when we should think about them within the wider network of everything on Earth, and how we impact everything around us and everything impacts us. So next time you design, maybe try asking yourself, what if future generations and ecosystems were stakeholders in your designs, and how you might design them differently? So having said all this now, design does not exist in a vacuum. As we know, we can do all the fun, innovative design we want, but then we're also sat within a company, within client, within an industry, within legal frameworks. So these are all limitations and restrictions that you need to think about while designing. But that's nothing new. We have to do that all the time anyway. But even though you might feel like a small cog in this big machine, as designers and creators, you have so much power in that position, because what you do directly impacts what is being made and the impacts of that technology. So when you're in that position, you can either decide to design by default, or you can take your power and decide to bring your values in and design something unique. Now, we've done all the fun part. You've designed it. You've thought of all of the requirements. Now, how are you going to sell it to a client? So you might think that the client's business goals are probably opposing to what you want. So you want innovation, they want speed and return on investment. But I encourage you not to think this way, but instead to set up your design with a narrative that speaks in business language, that emphasizes both the benefits to the user and the benefits to the business. So for example, if your client takes a look at this and goes, why can't we just design a normal cupboard? You can say to them, well, this cupboard is more accessible for more people, so therefore it is greatly widening our customer base. We're also using sustainable data practices, which means we're saving energy during development. And the positive inclusivity that we're using will cause positive brand sentiment. So again, it's using business language to show them the benefits of for both the business and the user. I'm going to give you a couple of examples of projects that I've worked on in Globant where we've brought in ethics. So the first one here is a tracking app for fitness and rewards. So it's an app that kind of got put on the shelf. It was left for a while, got a bit outdated. So we were asked to bring it back and think about how we could bring it up to date. So you're looking at the competitors, you see that mental health and wellness is something that should be integrated into it, as well as with the progression of technology, it should be able to integrate with more devices so more people can use it, which is all pretty standard. But then, because sustainability is something that I cared about, I thought, okay, so how can we embed that in the offering as well? So first off, looking at if we can track sustainable habits. And then when we were rewarding them for them, maybe the discounts are on sustainable products. Or you can choose instead to have the reward for yourself, you can give it to a charity or plant a tree with it. Now, when we showed this to the client, they loved it. And it isn't that clients necessarily are against ethical design, they just don't necessarily know what it looks like or what to ask for. So when they see it in a way that is visually engaging and makes sense for them as a business, they are generally quite open to it. The second example is a digital app that we made for visitors of a regenerative tourism company in Saudi Arabia. So they were already super ethical, they had amazing sustainability in their physical offering, so we wanted to also translate that into their digital offering. So because they were tracking ESG data, we wanted to use that and put it in for the guests to see. So the guests could see the impact that they were having while they were staying. So both the emissions that they were creating, but also the positive impacts they were having when they were doing some of the regenerative activities. So things like planting new coral reef or the mangroves. And then they could strive to leave with a net positive impact, which they would also be rewarded for. And the reward would also be part of an inheritance pass, so they could pass it down to future generations, making the rewards last much longer than just their holiday. So we were not only embedding ethics into it, but also enabling other people to act ethically. Before I go, just a couple of tips to leave you with how you can embed ethics into your practice. So number one, it's write them down somewhere easily accessible. So this is something that I do. I have just a little list of ethics written in the back of my work notebook. So it means whatever project that I'm working on, I can just flick back and go, oh, OK, let's see how I'm going to put that into the project. Secondly, it's to keep asking questions, pushing, and generally being difficult. Now, difficult is a term that women get called if they're not doing as they're told. So I choose not to take it as an insult, but as a compliment. Like, yes, thank you. I will keep questioning and challenging you and challenging myself and doing things differently. So please do the same. And then lastly, it's advocating for ethics throughout the entire design process. Because we do the design, we have a great idea, it gets signed off, and then once it goes into production, it can very easily slip because of time, because of money, because again, it's generally easier to do the default thing. So you really need to keep advocating it the whole way through so that you can ensure that your idea comes to life. And then just to leave you with a last quote by someone who I do think is smarter than me, is an amazing designer and researcher, Tobias Revel. He said, "It's not going to stop just because you don't like it." So take this as a call to action, that if you see something that you don't like and it's not aligning with your values, then do something about it, because we do have the power as designers and creators to make positive change. Thank you.